Welcome to Hero or Disruptor, exploring the power of teaching metaphors. I'm Garth Neufeld. In this series, Jane Hallinan and I take a deep dive into the hero's journey as applied to teaching, while also considering the transformational power of disruption. So where will you see yourself? As a guide to the next generation of heroes? Or as a disruptor of the status quo? Wherever you find yourself, thanks for joining us on this journey. We're continuing to talk about this whole transformational journey of students and where we as teachers, as instructors, professors, where we might be able to fit in on that journey. So last time we talked about being those guides and what makes for a good guide. I've been thinking about that actually a lot. That empathy piece has really kind of, I don't know, like got its claws into me.
Why do you suppose that is?
I think it's a lot. I think it's what I'm hearing at my institution, or among faculty. I think it's what I'm hearing with students. And it was a good reminder. That conversation was a good reminder that people are fighting, are having difficult fights in their lives, and they deserve some amount of empathy where we can give it. And so in my little world, I have this power, by the nature of my position as a professor, and probably other areas as well. Yeah, even in family and friendships and other things we do. And so I just, it resonated with me and something clicked. And I thought, it's always better to be a more empathic person, right? And so naturally, I think, and hopefully that sets up us to be empathic instructors.
Well, I was thinking about it too, but I took a slightly different turn, which is, I wonder if we aren't experiencing empathy exhaustion in some ways, because there is so much to be empathic about. And I'm thinking that the experience that I'm having with my students when they run aground, when there's something that's problematic, they usually start their explanation or defense with, "I'm just so busy," as though no one else in the world is busy, when everyone else in the world is busy. And so that really shouldn't become your lead when you're trying to do some resolution. So I've noticed that as soon as a student starts with, I can't do well on this because I'm just so busy, that it sort of tamps down my empathy, because if you can't even recognize the entire world is under this kind of strain right now, it may be harder for me to reach into that pocket and dredge up what I need to.
Well, that's a skill in itself, right? For students to come to the point where they they have the self-understanding. What's the word I'm looking for? That where they get it. They get that what is going on. It's just not so. It's pretty egocentric to say it in that way, right?
I think so. I think, and we know that narcissism is part of normal adolescent development, and trying to get the boundaries of it under control is certainly what we deal with in classes every day. But I do think the strains that people have experienced, at least students have gotten used to people trying harder to be empathetic. And then that can sometimes backfire, because the assumption is, I'll just be able to haul out this little excuse, I have mental health problems. Really? Who doesn't? Given where we are now. So I think it does strain people who are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, this is interesting. What are the right moves for an instructor these days? Because everybody is in this pressure cooker.
Well, I do think the pivot made all of us who are reasonable in trying to establish rapport with students. It made us take a little bit of a back seat on requiring and stipulating and using forceful language. I know I kind of did a revisit on my syllabi to determine, how much of a commander am I coming across in the syllabus? And right now, I think people need to understand that I'm in partnership with them. That's always been my stance, but I'm not sure that the way I have produced "thou shalt do this XYZ" in my class, that doesn't always project that kind of stance. So I think, especially now, knowing that everyone is trying to figure out a pathway in whatever this new normal, I hate that language, whatever it's going to be, that if we're going to get the best work from our students, we do have to help build bridges and pat and smooth in ways that maybe we're not used to.
Yeah, and I've been trying to think about what those ways actually are. I just listened to Eric and Missy had a conversation on Psych Sessions, and I was thinking through what they were saying, which is sometimes it's not enough to give an extension to a student who's just going through a tough time. But at some point, the credit has to be earned for a course. And so I don't know where those concrete changes that we want to make, those policies, I don't know how. I wonder if there's a limit to that empathy.
Yeah, I think there are. But first, let me say I listened to the Missy Eric discussion too, and I agree with you. It's one of the most important podcasts that you've done. And I think it fits right into what we're talking about, because Missy talking about the importance of compassion and the way that people reached out to her following the death of her husband is a good model for thinking about what kinds of bridges we may need to build to students in whatever strain they're having. But if we go back to, is there a general stance that one can take about how much do you have to put into that bridge? Do you have to build the bridge completely? Yeah. I think a guiding principle for me is always that I will always try to do what is in the best interest of my students.
Yep.
And sometimes that's failing them, because in failing them, they will get a message about standards and quality of work. And we know from a huge literature in social and positive psychology that failure can produce important lessons. So I don't always feel terrible when I'm failing someone. It's like, here's a lesson you may deserve. But I think if I know what the student's trajectory is, if I know where they're headed, that can sometimes temper what it is I'm going to do. It will temper how many times I'll give students opportunities to redo. As a general rule, I don't give students incompletes. I've always, that always seems to me to be an invitation for disaster. It becomes more on your workload, and the percentage of students who actually finish the work is so minor that long ago I said, this is not worth it. You have to make it or break it in my class, unless there's something very compelling. And usually I stick to that because I think what's in the best interest of the student is not to have me hanging over their head going into the next semester.
Yeah, that's really hard on students. I think the other benefit or gift that failing a student can offer is some reflection on, was I doing too much during this time? So I left, as a student, I was like my students, I'm working, I have a relationship, I am in school full time, and I have no margin for error. I have no margins. And so when one thing goes wrong, everything falls apart. And this is actually, I think this is problematic of our culture, that we feel, and I feel it in myself, that we need to be producing all the time and at a high level. And so it is good, I think, for every once in a while to get some feedback that we are not machines, that we can't operate at this level. So for some students who don't have that margin, maybe it's a good lesson.
Well, I think some students also get swept up with all of the obligations that they have. And so they forget that there may need to be priorities placed on those obligations. So I see this, I've seen this a couple times with students who are just really talented, that I see them in an early class and they just impress me like crazy. And then I get them in a later class and they're not the same person. The work ethic is missing. They're no longer shiny. They're no longer curious. And I just had an encounter with a student last week, as a matter of fact, where that had happened, that I'd had her in one class and thought, oh my, she's got a great future ahead. And in the second class, just performing at a suboptimal level. And so it comes to the point where students come to me and say, are you going to be able to write me a letter of reference? And I say to the student, you know what? I could do it for the old student I saw, but I can't do it for the one that I'm seeing today. And then watching, the face change and the huge disappointment, thinking that this was going to be a slam dunk. No, it's clear that you're making priorities that put your cognitive growth, your transformation in the back seat. And if I'm going to recommend you for graduate school, I've got to be completely confident that you are going to knock them dead. And I'm not right now. I'm sorry to say I'm not right now. Now you still have some time to recover. You're still in class with me. There are still some things that need to be done, but I need to see the old person return, not whoever it is that's been sitting in my class this semester. That was a really hard conversation, but wow. And fingers crossed, it may have the impact that I'm hoping for.
Well, that's so interesting because I've heard you mention this before, and maybe I just never got back around to digging into it a little bit. But I imagine that there are somebody's out there listening, and like me, saying, Jane, how could you tell a student no? A student who feels like they have this rapport with you, where they feel like they know you. There is something in me. By the way, I think it's the right move.
Yeah, okay, good.
But there's something in me that just says, "Oh, that's so mean."
Yeah, that might be why I'm called the badass grandmother in the department. I'm not an easy ask. And the fact that I teach capstone classes, I actually have quite a few students that legitimately would have an expectation that I know their work well, but I'm also pretty clear in my capstone class when I'm talking about letters of reference. Part of the training of capstone is, when you ask somebody for a letter of reference, you want to look them in the eye and say, can you write me a strong letter? Because you don't want a faculty member to agree out of being nice and then write a crappy, lukewarm, sandbagging letter. And I hate to say it, but I've seen faculty do that, or faculty say, yes, I'll write you a letter, and then write a letter that recommends against. And I really legitimately believe students have the right to develop letters of reference that support the case that they're making. So if I can't support the case that they're making, I'm simply going to politely say, I haven't seen the fire in the belly that tells me that graduate school is the thing for you. And I've put you in circumstances with research. I may have heard you complain about having to go to the library or do the rewriting that's necessary when you're doing scholarly work, and those things matter for graduate schools. So I think you need to think about where you have shown in the undergraduate curriculum and go after the teachers that really can write the most enthusiastic case for you. And sadly, that's not me.
Yeah, I think I have defaulted to writing lukewarm letters for students.
Well, so here's the problem with that you might as well just drive a stake in the heart of the student, because if they're competing for graduate programs, the letters that they're up against, the strong letters that they're up against, assuming that people read them, of course, that's another question. The strong letters that they're up against, if you write a lukewarm letter, you're not helping that student. Mm-hmm. You're identifying that there's something wrong because your letter is lukewarm, and I won't do that to a student.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, at least you're extremely transparent with them. I mean, this is where you're acting like that mentor, that guide is. You are. I can imagine any kind of movie scenario where the guide tells the hero on the journey, like, you're not cutting it. I mean, that's a point in the story, right? That's always a point in the story where No, you're gonna need to sacrifice. There is something that needs to happen here. If you want that greatness, you're going to have to do something different than what you're doing now.
Yeah, greatness, the kind of greatness that one needs to go into graduate school or even just get a reference from me, that requires an investment. It requires that students make that a priority. And if it's not there, then I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna whitewash it and say that it is there. I'm gonna be honest. And so students say that they both admire and fear my directness. The students that have growth as a development usually really enjoy what it is I have to offer because they know that they're going to come out stronger in the end. The students that are maybe not so invested in transformation are nervous about that. In fact, I can tell just a short story about that from yesterday. I'm in my capstone classes now, and the students are doing presentations. And so I've got a group of papers that are supposed to come in. I stagger my papers so that I don't have a stack at the end of the semester. So I've got a group of papers coming in. And at the end of class, I'm reminding this group that their papers are due at midnight. And I said, so what should be in my mailbox tonight? And one of the students says, tears. So I laughed and said, yes, tears and a copy of your paper, and we'll proceed from there. So I do know that it's a scary prospect, especially if you know you haven't done your best work. It's also one of the reasons why in the work that I ask students to do at the advanced level, I usually ask them to fill out a self-assessment using the rubric that I'm going to apply so that I know, do you know this isn't your best work? And then that facilitates a better conversation. If I get a self-assessment that says, I'm mentally challenged this week, time management was a problem, my dog died, whatever the explanation is, then I have an easier way to be able to say, oh, not your best work, but let's talk about what it would take to get it there. And if there's sufficient motivation on the part of the student, I might allow a revision for partial credit. They didn't meet the real deadline, but I don't want to crush them because they had difficulties or they made the wrong priorities. And so that self-assessment strategy is especially important for giving me the cues I need to know how to do that conversation.
If I'm your student, the student that you said, I am not going to write you a letter of recommendation right now, as you are currently performing. If I was that student, I said, it's just been a very rough time. Thing A, B, C happened. That's why my performance is the way it is. If that student can recognize that, does that change? Does that change anything for you? Or do you say, no, I'm still going to need to see that old student that I saw?
I'd probably be more comfortable saying yes if I see a change based on the nature of the conversation that we've had. Unfortunately, this conversation took place during the course instead of after the course. If it is specifically a series of terrible things, and yes, students have that, but some students have it all the time in every semester. A dying grandmother every semester. I mean, I hate to make light of that, but we do know that students can generate that same, here's why I'm not functioning well.
Yep.
I still think it's the basis for a conversation to say, well, how is it that you would propose things are going to change so that you actually can apply yourself in the way that you'll need to, that justifies my writing that kind of letter. I still wouldn't just automatically say, oh yeah, okay, so you had a hard semester. Yeah, I'll relent and say that you're going to be as competitive, because I can't do that. But I think redemption is a powerful narrative. I teach students to write redemption personal statements all the time. I screwed around in my first 2 years, and now I want to go to grad school and look at my GPA. I think that redemption motive is also something that works for me if I've got doubts about students. I don't usually get students who come back to me and ask again or say, life is different now. I have usually counseled them to say, you need to go back to a semester that wasn't this chaotic, and talk to the teachers that you got A's from. Those are the people that you need to get references from, the people who can vouch for you.
Yeah. No, that's a nice way through. Where we are in this kind of hero's journey is we are asking students to trust us. Like this student who is a great example, right? This student who came to you for this letter of reference, and then you tell them what it's going to take. And the kind of next stage of this journey is that we offer students. We're essentially trying to get them to trust us, that we know something of their path and of how to make them successful. And so, imagine that you're going, imagine, well, I'm in the middle of an addition on my house right now. And so we're putting a room on the back, and, it's not an easy decision to say, I'm going to put an addition on my house. But if a general contractor says to you, okay, first we're going to lay the foundation, and then we're going to build, we're going to, frame the house, and then we are going to drywall. And there are these steps, and I can see it. I'm thinking, now I know a little bit more to make that decision of, whether I'm going to do it or not. With this student, when you're, and this, I think this can happen in a lot of different ways, but kind of more generally towards student success. But with this student, what was the path that you told this student? It was a woman, right? Young woman, was it? Okay. Mm-hmm. So what did you tell her about what she exactly needed to do? Or if she said, okay, I want to be that student of the past, what is it exactly that you want from me?
In this case, this was a student who had impressed me in part because her written work was really well thought through, professionally done. Her career objective at the time in her first class was psychiatry. It's like, okay, that's pretty high level. And the kind of participation that she demonstrated in class showed that she was listening and thinking about what was being discussed. And so her comments, this is a critical feature in most of my letters of reference. Do the students add to the intellectual climate of the class? If they do, those are markers for where we want to go. In the current situation, not so much, not attending class. Sort of slumping in her chair, looking tired, simply just not showing the same verve. And because the larger projects loom, the writing and speaking projects that are part of Capstone, and as well the external assessor issues that I have students go visit with someone who's practicing in the field. Now, I need them, if they're being ambassadors from our program, I need them to be smart. I need them to be functional. And that could have been a concern. And so what I'm looking for is to see a bit more life, to see a bit more dedication, to see a bit more careful attention to written work, and certainly to be present for class sends the message that your graduate school material.
All right. So this is great. I think that this student walks away from that. She's talking to her guide. She walks away from that knowing that there are some very concrete steps that are going to need to be taken in order to be successful, or to have the successful end that she's looking for, which is a letter, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So then, with what is your part in that? So if we're asking our student to do something hard, something that's challenging to them, they're obviously tired, they're obviously, not invested right now as they were. What is the agreement here between you and her that if you do this, I will do my part. I will write that letter for you. You get it back to where it was. I'll do my part.
I think that's implied. It's not explicit. Mm-hmm. And I think the connection is, I want my students, and I do get this feedback a lot, I want my students to know I have a stake in what happens to them.
Yeah.
That I want the courses that I'm teaching to be useful to them, practically speaking, as they navigate their lives, whether it's graduate school or workforce or personal, whatever domain we're talking about. And so if I'm taking great pains to provide feedback that I think potentially is transformational, the student then should come away with the fact that I'm invested in what happens. And that may be sufficient. That may be sufficient to get things reignited again. And just in the case of this student, let's call her Stephanie, even though that's not her name. Stephanie this week in class was the old Stephanie. I mean, posture was different, attention was different. And so at the end of class, as she's packing up to go, I looked at her and said, "Welcome back, old Stephanie," with a large smile on her face, so that she understood I'm invested enough to be paying attention and giving her feedback that, that's the direction I need to see for you to get the cooperation from me that you want.
That's the agreement. The agreement is you make changes and I will see them. I'm watching. I'll witness them with you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Huh. And that's the total joy of the work that we do, is to be able to feel like you've got some fingerprints on the changes that students make, whether it's waking them up to the idea of how fun scholarship is, or whether it's helping them figure out that there are things that they can do so they don't have to be bored when they're in group meetings, or that they overcome their speaking anxiety. That's another thing that I work hard on with my students, that I think they know I care about their succeeding. And I think that makes them the ones who don't stay afraid of me. That makes them pretty grateful for that level of attention.
So have you ever been in a situation, and I'll put you on the spot and then I can reflect on it as well, but where you don't have a plan for a student, where a student comes to you and you don't have I'm not sure the nature of the question here. In this case, this student comes to you, you know what to do with this student. You've got a history with the student. You know what to tell this student to be successful. Can you imagine a scenario where a student comes to you, says, "I want to be successful," and you say, "I don't have the right plan for you"?
I can't. I relate to the question mostly because part of post-pandemic life is that so many students are in trouble with regard to getting letters of reference, because online environments don't allow instructors to get to know students as readily. It doesn't prevent students from getting to know their instructors, but it does require students and instructors to do something different than just post the lecture, take a quiz. I mean, the sort of canned approach. So I have had students who have talked with me, who were in online situations with me, who weren't particularly stellar performance, who would say, I need a letter of reference, but I don't know any faculty and I haven't been able to do research. And, here's the long list of stuff. And still, it's like, I can't give you the kind of letter that's going to help you out. Let's talk about what courses did you do really well in? And were there any in which someone may be able to talk specifically about some project work that you've done, some specifics that will be helpful to the quest that you have. So I don't throw people out of my office, but I treat it as a problem-solving situation where I'm not the solution, but I can certainly contribute to the solution by helping students think their way through to a different alternative.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I think about so if as this playing this mentor kind of position with my students, if I sometimes I don't think I have a plan when I don't have the shared experience that my student has. I think that's another way where they might come to me and I might say, I don't know. I mean, and resources I think are great and kind of sitting down to problem solve that. But knowing our own limitations as mentors and when we can't speak to something is probably a pretty good skill for us to have. And so I could see that students with particular backgrounds and experiences coming in where I may not know what those next steps are for them. So
I would agree, but I would suggest that there's also a problem with recognizing that. And that is one that plagues psychology advisors across the country, especially if psychology teachers have not been in the workforce other than academic life. it tends to introduce the problem of, you want to go in the workforce. I don't know how to do that because I never have outside this job. So go to the Career Center. So people treat that difference in background as a way to absolve themselves of giving students meaningful feedback. Now, I'm happy to say I was in the workforce for a year before I went to graduate school, because this is no secret, I didn't get into graduate school the first year I applied. While crushed, it turns out that's been such an important life event for me to have a different level of connectedness with students, and being able to advise them about the wisdom of a gap year and what it means to translate a psychology degree into workforce skills. I had to do that. Yeah. And I think I love hauling out stories about how I was able to do that as a project evaluator and producing statistics on a research project that could be understood by lay people. And so I learned a lot from that. I also learned that I wanted to go to graduate school rather than have that 8 to 5 existence. So I think that's my one worry about, if I can't relate to the background of the student, then I might not be as effective in offering advice. Yes, that's true, but it shouldn't serve as an excuse.
Yep. I had one other thought about having a plan for our students. I think that because we have the courses and curriculum, there is a plan. The plan is set as far as if you're going to be, in my case, if you're going to go for your AA and transfer to a college, it's set. In your case, if a student's going to be a psych major, the plan is somewhat set. So we kind of know the plan. What other steps need to be offered to students in a plan outside of the curriculum, which is set, the pathway that is set before them? What other things do we need to give them?
That's a great question. And I'm going to say it's not so much that it's outside the curriculum, it's that we need to do a better job of embedding in the curriculum decision processes that help students figure out where they want to go. I think, and I'm going to say that based on lots of experience as an academic program reviewer, that, when I march into somebody's department and size up what the curriculum looks like, typically there's not a very good level of assistance within the curriculum about helping students figure out how to translate what they're learning into something that will be valuable to the outside world, whether it's workforce or graduate school. And so I think the solution is actually kind of fun. The solution is that you build in some elements, especially in advanced coursework, when the decision is starting to loom really close. Elements that involve career issues, whether it's you're putting students in work groups and asking them to function like they have projects that they will have at work, or I like to highlight a process that I do in my positive psychology class, which is I say, I want you to tell me who are you going to be in 5 years? I want you to roll out what is the possible self you're working toward and show it to me creatively. That usually makes students go wild, because then they go, oh, we're not creative. I said, yes, you are. So now you're going to show me that you are you're going to do a song, or you're going to create a poster, or you're going to do something that covers these curriculum points, but it's going to be about you and what you want. And you're going to tie that back to what you're learning in this class. I just think even if you have a class, say, take sensation and perception, how does the knowledge in that class make you more attuned to who you want to be as a psychological professional? Now, that's not psychologist, right? But it's someone who's using psychology frameworks to navigate professional life. And that's everybody, grad school and workforce. And so I think the more opportunities that we embed along those lines, then we get students who, when you ask them, oh, you're about to graduate, what can you do? They can answer that question, not just answer it, but answer it fluently and self-confidently. And that's what I'm after for the students that I have in my classes.
Oh, that's so great. And I think it brings us beyond what is just the standard pathway, and which all students are kind of boiled down to the standard pathway. But as a good mentor, you need to know the things outside of that pathway, the skills that your students are going to need to have, because when those students come to you and they say, is it worth my energy to make this decision to go to the end? Is it worth me, taking on a loan, or is it worth me dropping a class and doing this more slowly and more effectively? You can say yes, and I'll tell you how to get there. This is what you're really aiming for. You're aiming for this skill. You're aiming to be in the workforce, and this is what that means based on my experiences. That's how you're sharing it with your students. But it's outside of you're saying you can embed it into the curriculum, but it's outside of taking classes. Is what I'm saying.
I think it can be outside of taking classes, and I think the smarter we are, the more we look for avenues to make linkages within classes. And I want to go back to what you said, this really important point about the conversation that you might have with a struggling student who's taking too many classes, who has decided the priority is get through as quickly as possible, and electing then to do it in a piss poor fashion. It's like, that's not going to help you. If you're not using your college education to make your cognition better, if you're not being thoughtful, if you're not being reflective about what's going on, you can get a degree, but that's not going to particularly help, let alone not get letters of recommendation. So sometimes those painful conversations of, you need to pick a course, you need to drop a class because you've got to reorganize so we can see your best work. We need to see your best work.
Jana, what stage of your career did you feel confident about knowing what to tell students on their pathways? Like having the answers?
Yeah. Okay. So I've been at it now for 41 years, and there are some days when I don't think I know how to do it. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to leave the impression that I've arrived. I think this is part of the joy of the discipline, the profession that we've gotten in, is that the variety of personalities we see are going to challenge the fundamental things that you know about how to interact with students. But I do think that you and I, we've got a little bit of a leg up because of our counseling and clinical backgrounds, that we understand some fundamental things that help us engage in conversations with students. And so the fact that I always remember about any interaction that everyone believes he or she is the hero of their own narrative means that, most of the time people aren't trying to take advantage of me. They're simply trying to get the best out of the circumstances that will help them out. And as long as I remember that, it tends to keep me from getting upset or mad. It probably didn't take too long for me to be able to figure out that balance, but I do think that it is in part related to clinical training.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a psychologist. He's a practicing psychologist, and we went to college together, to graduate school together. And I was just talking through our experiences. We were reminiscing on that experience, and he said, "I think we don't realize the skills we developed there. I think you almost just taken for granted, like everybody's got these skills, and." Yeah, it's not the case. Eric will tell me every once in a while that it's not the case.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there aren't some soft underbelly spots. For example, statistics. My statistical training is so old and ancient that I just defer to anyone in the department when a statistical question comes up. It's not who I am. I know that my strength is more in the interpersonal side, and I do think mentoring is a strength, whether I'm mentoring students or whether I'm mentoring new faculty or new chairs or new deans. I mean, that's sort of my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I told Janet.
But don't ask me about R. Because I don't
totally.
know. And I don't know.
I had to, I was looking at a Jess Hartnett tweet today, and I thought, I need to look at this longer because I don't get it yet. Yeah. It's a statistics tweet, and I told Janet Peters this last week, I said, I need to take your stats course because I don't know what I'm doing right now. So yes, we have our strengths and our weaknesses, the gifts from our education, and yeah. Jane, thanks for chatting. We meandered a bit, but I think we really hit what I wanted to hit today, which is when students come to us, do we have a plan? And what is the agreement that we're willing to make with them about that plan towards their success? And so I really like your student story. I think it was very, very helpful. So thanks again.
You're welcome.